Including tonight's class, there are 3 classes remaining. So tonight is Capricorn, next week is Aquarius, and followed by that we have Pisces, and then this course is completed. So pretty
fine course.
Remarkable. And the process we've been trying to work into this series is to hold some of the conversation and questions till the end of the class, and then if we'll have an open mic, so to speak. Anybody that wants to add something or ask questions can do so at that time.
Both of them raise are on.
Okay. So welcome everyone, both in class and who are watching the online class. All right. Without a knowledge of mythology, much of the elegant literature of our own language cannot be understood and appreciated. Thomas Bulfinch, author of Bulfinch's Mythologies, which we've all been exposed to at some point or another. And that's why these stories are so important. Once we learn them, we can start applying them to all types of things that we read. Tonight we are looking at the Decanates of Capricorn, pictured in the heavens by the goat. Quite often it is the sea goat, which means it has the tail of a fish, but the body of a goat. Capricorn does belong to the element of earth, but curiously, it falls in the section of the heavens which is known as the sea. And this is where we find Pisces austrinus, Delphinus. It's where we find the fish, the twin fish, Pisces. It's where we find Cetus, Aquarius. This is the watery section of the heavens. And so we have this...
so is that why it's called the sea goat? I mean, it's a mythological creature.
Mm-hmm.
And
it is.
So it just... Maybe we should close the door.
Capricorn.
Michelle Rommel still has no car, so she's online.
Great. Welcome, Michelle. Movable quality. The other movable signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra. So this is Earth, but in its most highly charged particles, so to speak. It's movable Earth, and the movable signs all tend to be pioneers. Capricorn takes the element of Earth, which is pragmatism, and expresses it through the pioneering qualities, which have to do quite often in the realms of business and diplomacy.
Move us right here.
Welcome. Come on in and grab chairs. The key word for Capricorn is I use. And this implies some of the pragmatism that's associated with natives of this sign. I always describe Capricorns as tool-wielding primates. And the Capricorn individual, part of this use, oftentimes we think of somebody who is a user as a manipulator, which Capricorns can be, but they're not exclusively that. Capricorns can substitute. So they're able to see multiple uses to everything in their life, and that everything has a purpose and can be applied. So if they're planning to make, biscuits in your house for Sunday breakfast and they can't find your cookie cutter, they'll pull down a wine glass and pump them out that way. Or if the, handle, the knob on the back door is coming loose, they don't know where your tools are, they'll pull out a butter knife and screw it in. So that's part of the Capricorn nature, is substitution and seeing everything has a use. Every experience in life has a use, has a purpose. And every person, every individual, and most materials. And that can, of course, make them very conservative, especially where material things are concerned. It's waste not, want not with Capricorns. So they're the ones that quite often could have the ball of string accumulated over 5 decades in their kitchen drawer, or the ball of rubber bands. The newspapers, which never have quite made it to the paper drive or to the recycle bin, but it's all right there, and it will all be useful someday. Things come in, but things don't get thrown out.
They sound like hoarders.
The potential is there.
Yeah.
Collectors is what they would prefer to be called. There are 3 constellations that are the sub-influence of Capricorn, and they have nothing to do with Earth. We have Cygnus the Swan, Delphinus, which is a cetacean or sea mammal, and Pisces Australis, which is a large fish in the heavens. So these are the most curious and confounding of the decanates when we start applying them overall to the other qualities of Capricorn. But they are all the earth signs. We have Capricorn, Decadent of Capricorn, Saturn ruled, Taurus, Decadent of Capricorn, Venus ruled, and the Virgo, Decadent of Capricorn, which is Mercury ruled. So let's start with the Swan. This is the first 10 degrees of Capricorn. The solar date, September 22nd to January 1st. So when we have the winter solstice, the sun is not only moving into Capricorn, it moves into the first decadent of Capricorn. And this swan is pictured flying swiftly southward. Now, those of us who live here along the Rio Grande get to have a lot of experience with large avian creatures moving south. And the Bosque del Apache is only 90 miles south of here, and we can witness not swans in this particular region, but Canadian geese, snow geese, the Grus canadensis, the cranes, and the also whooping crane and sandhill crane. So big birds flying southward. The key word for this is organization. Now, certainly that could come from either the pattern in which the large birds fly. More likely than not, it comes through the Saturn influence of the Capricorn decadent of its own sign.
Do swans migrate too?
Yes, they do, from Northern Europe, I believe from the Baltic region south to Africa.
Wow.
Yeah, they have a long migration. And of course, these were the birds that the ancient Greeks were exposed to. And so they're, instead of, choosing the sandhill crane, which might have been done in this environment, they chose another migratory bird. And again, thinking of Capricorn, which I think of as being so pragmatic, so practical, so businesslike, so external and materialistic, However, the spiritual text for this decanate is, under certain conditions, the stone is rolled from the entrance to the tomb, and man consciously exchanges ideas with those who have entered upon the chamber of death. We'll certainly see from mythology where this link is, but curiously, we'll also see in the Capricorn temperament that this area of mystery is also prominent in those born under the first 10 degrees. Now, the constellation itself, this is one of the northern constellations, and it's found on the plane of the Milky Way. Cygnus is both Greek and Latin for swan. And you'll pretty much find it the same in other Romance languages. If you ever go to see Black Swan or Swan Lake, cygne is the French for that term, and a cygnet is a baby swan. Now, sometimes it's referred to as the Northern Cross because of the primary stars in this constellation form a cross in the heavens, which is easily recognizable. Now, the mythology for the swan comes from two different sources. One of those sources, which is pictured here in this, I actually believe this is Da Vinci. Could be wrong.
I don't think so.
No.
Botticelli?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe this is Botticelli. Though the landscape looks very much
Could be.
like Da Vinci.
Huh.
So, the story was, as we have heard repeatedly over the previous 9 weeks, about Zeus's lusty affairs. And to escape the notice of his wife, he oftentimes had to assume different forms to be able to couple with mere mortals. He fell in love with human beauty and found every opportunity, male or female, for these sort of illicit affairs, which usually ended, with some type of offspring that was half man, half deity, or demigod. And the offspring generally were greatly displeasing to Hera, another evidence of her philandering husband. So, this was one of his very creative transformations, was into that of a swan, where he seduced Leda. And you can see here at the bottom that the results of this is that she gave birth to the Dioscuri, the sons of God, or the Gemini twins, Castor and Polydeuces. The other legend, probably more appropriate to this story, is that of somebody we spoke about last week, which is Orpheus, the greatest of musicians whose music could stop wild animals in their track. And it's believed that after Orpheus's demise at the hands of the Maenads, which were the female frenzied followers of Bacchus, He didn't want to run into them on a dark night after they had been drinking. You know, they would tear you limb from limb. So, sound like a gang of serial killers. So he was transformed into the swan and placed in the heavens next to the constellation Lyra, which is his harp in the sky. Now, as the story goes, Orpheus had previously descended into hell. He had descended into the realm of Hades to free his beloved Eurydice after her untimely death. So we can see this parallel between the story of Orpheus and the spiritual text that Zane gives about rolling back the stone from the tomb and entering into the realms of the dead. Very few were allowed to ever do that.
Well, also Capricorn starts with the longest night of the year. So,
Which is the tomb.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's literally the tomb and the sun being reborn out of that tomb. Now, here's what Zane has to say about Cygnus, the first decanate. Speckless white, which with outspread pinions wings its way from the frozen north towards the sunny southern skies. Pictures among the constellations the first decanate of Capricorn. It symbolizes the first news of a new order of things, a retreat from the crystallizing influence of materialism, and the harbinger of the approaching warmth of a spiritual spring. So we find those born under this influence, when living at their best, to be forerunners of better conditions. They, better than any others, realize the value of system and organization to effect any worthwhile changes. And in business or in politics, both of which are spheres of activities to which they naturally gravitate, their greatest asset is in conciliating different factions and inducing them to join in some large merger, which will operate more economically and efficiently than they could any one faction alone. These people shoulder responsibility readily and become the managers in the world. To live at their highest, they must be permitted to find expression for their talent of coordination. That's from Delineating the Horoscope. It goes on to say, swans are reared from downy youngsters in the icy regions of the north, but grown to adult size, at the approach of winter, they take their departure from that region, which so well, with its bleak hardness and cruel perils, symbolizes the environment which we call Earth. Like some friends we have known, loved ones who already have passed, they leave the scenes of their early hardships and wing their way to sunnier skies. As the stone was rolled away from the sepulchre, or lowest point in the sun's descent, giving the promise of a future life, so, at their appointed time, do the swans again return. Snow white in purity, the most graceful of all that fly, with white expanse of wing, nothing so readily suggests angels. Message bearers, coming from a brighter realm than this, bringing news of loved ones, and telling something of the surroundings there, where we too will live before many cycles of the sun. Then goes on to say, the swans returning from the south like messengers bringing information from this afterlife do not fly in loose flocks, but in well-defined V formations. The key word for the decanate represented by the swan where the sun may be found, December 22nd to January 1st, therefore is organization. And the text is, under certain conditions, the stone is rolled from the entrance of the tomb, and man consciously exchanges ideas with those who have entered the chamber of death. So I've thought about this a lot, because there's so many things you have to patch together when you're studying the decadence, the keywords, the spiritual text, the glyphs for the signs and planets involved, and the mythologies, the stories that are wrapped into it. Organization is the act or process of organizing, the state or manner of being organized, or something that is organized. You know, all sounds very Capricornian, but doesn't necessarily sound very spiritual. Except when you think about it, you know, when information is brought from higher realms and then shared with someone, the only way that it's really useful to another person is the way in which that material or that information is organized. So, those are my thoughts on that.
Well,
Now, yes,
sorry.
Vicki, you can
Sure.
speak.
Well, what about the idea that taking the densest of material and being able to find some purpose for it, other than self-aggrandizement, which is what I see a lot in the Capricorns that I know. They're always trying to make some use of something for other people, or at least the most spiritualized Capricorns I know.
Yeah, no, they do.
And
that does require being organized. And he describes earlier, whether it's in business or politics, they're good managers. And a good manager has to be aware of all of the resources at hand, all of the materials they're using, including the human resources and their talents and skills.
Right. And it's also, I mean, isn't that what we all have to do? We all have to taste the material world and learn to work with it, and then to let it go, not to become self-absorbed by it.
Well, true. As I always say, you can't take it with you. You know, Lee Riffle used to say to me, when you die, you don't need to be buried in a suit with pockets. Because you can't take any of it with you. The only thing you take with you is your experiences and your skills. Your experiences become your character because it's the sum total of everything you've done. And your skills are part of that. Now, I've picked a really curious chart for tonight for this, because it's somebody that straddles both of these worlds, the sort of the world of the very organized and the very esoteric in some ways. And this is a scientist by the name of Carrie Banks Milhous. Yet, I must read you the quote from him. My mother's parents were close to me all during my childhood, and her father, Albert, stopped by to see me in a non-substantial form on his way out of this world in 1986.
It's fascinating, given that.
There's more. All right. He was born December 28, 1944, 1:58 p.m. in Lenoir, North Carolina. Let's talk about him. Here's the bio I've pulled together. Carrie Banks Milhous is an American chemist and winner of the Nobel Prize. He received the award at age 48 on December 10, 1993, sharing the prize with Michael Smith of the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Milhous and Smith shared the Nobel honorarium of $825,000. Nice. Milhous was born near the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina and was raised in Columbia, South Carolina. In 1966, he received a Bachelor of Science from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and in 1972, he earned a PhD in biochemistry from UC Berkeley. Over the years, he has worked as a fiction writer, pediatric cardiologist, pharmaceutical chemistry, and managed a bakery. For 7 years, Milhous worked as a biochemist for Cetus Corporation in Emeryville, California. In April 1983, Milhous began puzzling over a DNA sequencing experiment. He came up with the polymerase chain reaction that makes it possible to reproduce DNA from minute amounts up to quantities. Cetus Corporation gave him a $10,000 bonus for his discovery. Cetus went on to make $300 million when the company sold the patent to Roche Molecular Systems. In 1993, he was awarded a science prize from Japan with a $385,000 cash award. In his 1998 autobiography, Dancing Naked in the Minefield, Milhous expressed his disagreement with the scientific community, which claims evidence supporting human activity as a cause for ozone depletion and climate change. He has also been called an AIDS denialist for holding the opinion that HIV is not the cause of AIDS. He has been married 4 times and has 3 children by 2 ex-wives. He is an avid surfer who lives in La Jolla on the California coast. Milhous openly discusses his use of LSD and is quoted as saying, "What if I had not taken LSD ever? Would I still have invented PCR?" He replied, "I don't know. I doubt it. I seriously doubt it." Milhous is open to the possibilities of alien visits and questions the nature of ESP. He describes having once spoken to a glowing green raccoon. Milhous arrived at his cabin in the woods of Northern California around midnight one night in 1985, and having set off for the outhouse with a flashlight, on the way he saw something glowing under a fir tree. Shining the flashlight on this glow, it seemed to be a raccoon with little black eyes. The raccoon spoke, saying, "Good evening, doctor." And he replied with, "Hello." Ever controversial, he has confounded the scientific community by saying, "Astrology has some scientific basis and probably has done more than psychiatry to help people understand their lives."
Yes.
Yeah. He's a little kooky, but hey.
But we like them.
Join the rest of us.
All right,
Really just
take a look.
fascinating.
Doesn't seem like a classic conservative Capricorn.
No, but we're also learning from the Decanates that there is more than the classic conservative Capricorns. Over the years, I've heard so many Capricorns say to me, you know, I hate reading about Capricorns in astrology books. You know, they're so despicable. And, you know, it doesn't always reflect this whole other side to this sign. So this organization decadent is in the 9th house of his chart. Now, wherever we find the sun, I always like to say that is where we find our self-esteem. Look to where the sun falls in your chart. And that's where you're looking for your sense of power or purpose, or where you derive your pride. In his chart, it's in the 9th house, which has to do with academics, being smart, and spirituality, philosophies. And this organization being in his 9th house is the ability to, take a wild hair, such as, whatever the insight was he had to drive him to look at the patterns in the DNA sequencing in order to reproduce it. I'm forgetting now as I get older and more forgetful, but there was a German chemist who actually discovered the carbon ring, the benzene ring, from a dream back in the mid-19th century.
Yeah. It is a famous name, his ring.
I want to call it Boehm's ring.
Yeah, I was thinking of Boehm's too, but that's a slightly different name.
And I remember some 15, 20 years ago watching a show on PBS, which was about all of the advances that were being made in everything from prosthetics to the ability to give voice to people who were without speech, but all of the little discoveries that have been used to help the handicapped or persons who are not sighted being able to sit in a wheelchair and perceive what's ahead of them because of impressions that are being projected to the skin on their back. Things like that. And the conclusion in that story that I remember was much of these inventions, as we call them, had come to these inventors through dreams or these almost mystical experiences. Now, if you want to fit in, you just don't talk about your glowing raccoon.
And he couldn't resist with that Saturn, Neptune, Sun,
Well,
T-square.
and I think it's this.
He had to tell
Mars,
the truth.
Mercury conjunct, they're only 32 minutes apart in the 9th house.
That he had to blurt out his truth.
Exactly. I like the way you said that. Blurt out your truth. That's very, very descriptive of a Mars-Mercury conjunction in the 9th house. That aspect is extremely powerful. The only aspect I'm seeing here that is more powerful than that is the opposition from the Sun to Saturn.
Well, in that Neptune, look at the Neptune. It's almost exactly T-square.
The sun.
So he's got a
Isn't it?
big...
It is, except for the fact they're in hated houses, and that diminishes some of the power that one might otherwise have. The Sun square Neptune, although it's close to exact, curiously only has 7.5 asteroids tied in with it. The Sun-Saturn opposition is 10.57 asteroids, and the Mercury-Mars conjunction is 10.47 asteroids. So we can see if we just look at these two aspects, Sun-Saturn opposition, the power urges are in a separation compound with the safety urges. My guess, especially being a Capricorn, this is somebody who both struggles with and fights with the desire to fit in. Yet conservative people are rarely the ones who make great discoveries. Why? They're always playing it safe. So, but this is a very powerful influence for him. And I think it helps him to take these more illumined or esoteric ideas and give them structure or give them a form. It may be, if we think of Saturn as that which is structure, we can see this man was able to, see the structures of things and how to replicate them. Now the aspect you point out, Vicki, Sun Neptune square could certainly account for the use of psychotropic substances and or mysticism and the whole spiritual experience as being a part of his life.
Yeah, his ability to see the underlying organization of the chemical structure and his desire to communicate it takes a whole different bent when it aspects the Neptune. It takes him out of this world.
Yeah.
Well, he might actually have had real
Psychic
visions.
experience, well,
That
absolutely.
he might have seen the structure of things in a sort of Neptunian
Like
kind
he
of.
saw that green
yeah.
raccoon.
They say,
Right. Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
They say Stephen
Right.
Hawking envisions structural things like, forms that he then has to put words to, but that's how he thinks.
But that's what every inventor and artist must do.
Yeah.
They have to envision something, which is why Neptune is so important. Because you have to be able to imagine or envision it, but then having a vision of something is really quite useless unless you have the organization by which you can bring it about and give it some structure for others.
Yeah, and then look at that Neptune trining that Uranus over in the second house. He didn't make money off of his his visuals.
Yes, no, it came through philanthropic sources and not through his employment. So,
Well, the company gave him, a pretty good stipend before he won the Nobel Prize. Even though the company made many, many times more off his invention than he did, they did pay him for it. So he earned some, and then more was rewarded. And Jupiter is in aspect with that Mercury.
Square.
That's another square.
Jupiter squares the moon, it squares Mercury, it squares Mars.
Oh, he's got some
Oh yeah.
Which,
really dynamic energy there.
That's another T square right next to that Sun, Saturn, Neptune one.
That's why he
yes,
retreated
we've
to the
got
beach.
2 T-squares in this chart.
He just doesn't fit in, period.
Good for him.
Right.
That's worked well for
We
him, I
like
think.
that. We like that about him.
Now, again, 2 T-squares in the chart, it may come as no surprise that the total for harmony for the planets is a minus 109.40.
Yeah.
Question, addition, Bart?
And Michelle Ramo asks, how does Pluto in the 5th house figure in to all of this?
Well, 5th house is tied in with any form of creativity, including scientific creativity. It's also tied into the children. The Pluto does not form any aspect of the sun, but this could be his...
It's actually an inconjunct.
here it's out of orb. For
It's that
an
really tight
inconjunct.
orb for.
Yes, it's. I think you've got
Yeah, 2 or 3
at 347. Yeah, I
That has
believe
to do
it's
with the house that the sun's in.
in the Cadent house. So it's no aspect happening here. So I'm not sure how the Pluto in the fifth house operates.
What aspects does it make in the astrodyne grid?
It forms a semi-square to the moon, which could be why the children don't live with him. It forms a sesqui square to Mercury, sesqui square to Mars, semi-square to Jupiter. Not a whole lot of harmony here. But it does form a sextile to Uranus, a sextile to Neptune, and a square
Wow.
to the midheaven.
All the outer planets, they're sextile.
Yes. So Uranus, Neptune, trine, both of them sextile Pluto. So most of you born in the mid-40s have that in your charts, depending on, how it's set up, what the orb of aspect is, depending on whether they're falling in angular, succedent, or cadent houses. Pretty interesting stuff, huh?
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Barb.
Comment from Fred Michael. He says there's a moon conjunct Pluto in the first decade of Capricorn, squaring a R Mercury conjunct Uranus in Aries, and I have Capricorn rising.
Oh, he must be talking about his chart.
Yeah, there is no Pluto
I think he's
moon
talking about his own
conjunction. It's a
personal chart.
semi-square here.
Yeah.
He's talking about his own personal chart.
Okay, none of us have access to your chart, Fred Michael, so I don't feel like we can discuss that in the class. But on the chart on the screen here, we have a semi-square from the moon to Pluto. So we've got some interesting stuff going on here. Let's move on. Second decanate of Capricorn is Delphinus, which is the dolphin in the heavens. These are any planets falling from 10 degrees to 19 degrees 59 minutes of Capricorn.
Oh, didn't
I
get that.
corrected that.
Well, go one at a time and we can, well, actually, we can't see them as they pile on, though, can we?
No, but I could read them to you,
Okay.
because I do have them in my notes, and you have them in your notes. Delphinus is the Taurus decanate of Capricorn. It's governed by the planet Venus. So there's a emotional element in place here. The solar dates for this are January 1st through 10th. The image is basically a dolphin that has come to the surface to breathe. And the key word for this decadent is martyrdom. The spiritual text, man, by his thoughts, his emotions, and his actions on earth, builds for himself a home in a higher realm where he will dwell after passing from the physical plane.
That's such a sequitur to the previous spiritual.
It is, and it's so non-materialistic
Yeah.
in many ways, which is confusing, considering we're talking about the sign Capricorn.
Except that, the idea of accruing merits to build a spiritual home later, that has a sort of Capricornian feel to it.
It does. That's a really good insight.
And that's pretty ubiquitous among all the religions of the world.
Uh-huh.
Even the Girl Scouts.
Mary, you get badges if you're. All right. Delphinus is Latin for dolphin. And this is a northern constellation, but it's very close to the celestial equator. This is a small constellation, and you can see here that Delphinus is flanked by Aquila, Pegasus, Equus, Sagitta.
There's the Venus influence.
Yes, to some degree. It's actually, this is an image, I believe, of Poseidon and Amphitrite, the queen of the Nereids, the sea nymphs. And one legend from classical mythology, even though it says form, holds that Poseidon placed the dolphin in the sky after he assisted the god in wooing the beautiful Nereid Amphitrite. 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 That's a mouthful. Amphitrite. So, and again, if we look back, it's the Venus Decanate of Capricorn. So this is a love decanate, so to speak. But that's not the only story. And another legend tells the story of Arion, who was a poet from Lesbos. He was sat upon by avaricious pirates as he sailed, though here it says sallied home, from a poetry competition laden with rich trophies. Well, maybe he did sally home.
He sallied forth.
He sallied as he sailed.
What a fabulous image.
Yeah, right.
Gosh.
Well, the plot
There's
thickens.
no reference to the sea monster.
Oh, sorry.
Is there?
Well, it was this artist's image of a dolphin.
He didn't live on the sea coast.
No, I think not. This was a landlocked artist.
So that was his means of sailing?
Well, I'm going to tell you the story. As I said, the plot thickens. The pirates gave him the choice of either committing suicide and being buried on land, or to throw himself into the sea.
Gee.
Well, neither option appealed to him. So he requested that he be allowed to sing one last song. His hymn to the god Apollo was so beautiful that it attracted numerous dolphins. Rather than be killed, Arion plunged into the sea and was carried to his safety by a dolphin. The dolphin was later catastrophized by Apollo as the constellation Delphinus.
Catasterized? What does that mean?
Catastrophized. That means you were made into a
Castrated.
constellation. No.
Oh.
An asterism is a star constellation.
Oh,
Wow.
asterized.
When we use the word catastrophe, we're talking about something that has gone against the stars.
Wow.
Oh.
Catastrophized.
So, that's a pretty great story. But what does it all mean?
It means that you better learn how to sing a really good song.
You better sing or swim.
This is morning on the radio, I heard that there was this legend that if you sang to the whales, they would sing back with you. Just this morning. Go figure.
Mhm. Well, there's something in this
Yeah.
story for you, Laura. So, Zane talks about the second decanate of Capricorn. Delphinus the dolphin pictures among the constellations the second decanate of Capricorn. This is the Taurus decanate of Saturn's sign, the strong emotional element conferred by the sub-influence of the moon's exaltation being indicated by the water in which the mammal lives.
So is that the good song?
That must be where he got his rhythm. While the sun passes through this decanate, we have Epiphany, and also the common civil year begins, bringing a new dispensation. And about the dolphin that represents this section of the zodiac, there are many traditions implying it to be a savior of men. So, we find that those born here possess extraordinary ability to make the most of whatever environment they find themselves in, even as the dolphin has adapted itself to the water. They utilize every condition to their purpose, and while encountering many setbacks, they have the persistence to again come to the surface and carry on. They are indefatigable workers, and when they set their minds upon some worthy aim, they scale the heights to success. And if they get a higher than material viewpoint, they are capable of great self-sacrifice in the interest of universal progression. All right, and let's look at something from spiritual astrology. Not only does Saturn, the planet of Capricorn, rule the grave, but it is when the sun is in this earthly sign of Capricorn that it reaches its lowest point in the annual cycle, representative of the tomb. All three decadents, therefore, quite consistently give some teaching in reference to the condition encountered after the stone has been rolled from the entrance of the tomb at the winter solstice, and the soul has left its tenement of clay and passed to more congenial realms. I want to live in congenial realms.
I didn't know I lived in a tenement right now.
Congenial realms sounds quite appealing. Well, therefore, the constellation picturing the middle decanate of the sign, where the sun may be found each year from January 1st to 10th, represents a dolphin. It is not surprising that in various lands it is also known as a coffin. Among nations familiar with the Bible, it is more commonly referred to as Job's coffin. The dolphin, which is the picture of the constellation in the sky, is always represented as a beneficent sea dweller which performs good deeds and rescues from death those who are persecuted, especially those who are martyrs to some just cause. It is due to these legends and to the observation that those born when the sun is in this decanate often take up some worldly cause and work ardently for it in spite of its unpopularity. And the key word of the constellation is martyrdom. The text associated with Delphinus, therefore, is man, by his thoughts, his emotions, and his actions on earth, builds for himself a home in higher realms where he will dwell after passing from the physical plane. Let's talk about martyrdom. The condition, sufferings, or death of a martyr. extreme suffering or torment. That's it.
That's an incomplete definition, it seems like. It's much more complete what he was saying up here about having a cause and sticking to it despite the unpopularity of it, etc. That seems like it should be part of the definition.
Well, we'll redefine this.
Richard Nixon.
Yeah. You know, most all of us have strong feelings about Nixon. Most all of us who are more than 40 years old. Here's his quote. I gave them a sword and they stuck it in, and they twisted it with relish. And I guess if I had been in their position, I'd have done the same thing.
Who's he referring to?
Himself,
Yeah.
probably Watergate or
Watergate,
something like that,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
The American population, American people.
He got pardoned,
Yeah.
too.
So, you know, one of the reasons I find Nixon so fascinating, to me, he is the penultimate Capricorn when we look at what's the word that describes the best trait of Capricorn? Can anyone remember the key word for?
I used.
Well, the key word for Capricorn is I use. The best quality of Capricorn is considered to be diplomacy.
Oh, diplomacy,
Nixon opened up trade with China.
yeah.
We take it for granted now because look around you. Everything comes from there. May look Egyptian, but it was painted in China. Just kidding. But it's almost true. And the worst quality of Capricorn is deceit. And he was caught in a little white lie. Well, maybe it was bigger than that.
Wasn't very
So-
white either.
So,
Well, I think he thought it was necessary for the cause. That's the martyr thing. He was, I'm sure in his mind it was a bigger purpose that justified that lie.
To keep him in power.
Right, exactly. I mean, hard to know.
Power blinds a lot of people.
all right. Richard Milhous Nixon, born January 9th, 1913, 9:35 p.m. in Yorba Linda, California. An American lawyer who entered politics in 1946, became a U.S. Senator in 1950, was elected Vice President under Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1952, and was elected President of the United States on November 5th, 1968. Those are a lot of accomplishments. Nixon was born to Francis Anthony Nixon and Hannah Milhous on January 9th, 1913 in Yorba Linda, California. The second of 5 sons, Nixon was named Richard after Richard the Lionhearted. His dad was an oil field worker, streetcar motorman, service station, and store owner. Nixon grew up in a proper Quaker household. In June 1934, Nixon graduated second in his class from Whittier College. He subsequently enrolled at Duke Law School, where he graduated third in his class. He returned to Whittier to set up a law practice. Nixon met Thelma, Catherine, Ryan, aka Pat, while auditioning for a part in a play at the Whittier Community Theater. They were married on June 21st, 1940 in Riverside, California. After a 4-year stint in the Navy during World War II, Nixon returned to California, where in 1946 he won a seat in Congress. In Washington, Nixon quickly gained a reputation for his zealous persecution of communists working in the federal government. While on the House Un-American Activities Committee, he was involved in 2 of the most famous cases: the Whittaker Chambers, a confessed Communist Party courier, and the former State Department official, Alger Hiss, who was accused by Chambers of passing secrets onto Soviet agents. Nixon moved into the national spotlight in 1950 when he won a seat in the U.S. Senate. In 1952, at 39 years of age, Nixon was selected as Eisenhower's vice presidential running mate. On September 23, 1952, Nixon delivered what became known as the Checkers speech, after he was accused of personally benefiting from a slush fund backed by millionaires. He detailed modest personal items belonging to him and his family, including Checkers, a spaniel given to his children by an admirer. Nixon urged the audience to express their views to the Republican National Committee about whether he should be taken off the GOP ticket or not. The public responded with more than 2 million letters and telegrams by a margin of 350 to 1, urging him to stay. He was elected vice president on November 4, 1952. In 1960, Nixon narrowly lost the run for president against John F. Kennedy. His political fortune continued to sink as he lost the gubernatorial race to Brown in 1962. In January of 1963, he joined a New York law firm and kept his hand in politics by campaigning for Barry Goldwater. In 1968, Nixon won the presidential election against Hubert Humphrey by a narrow margin. Excuse me. An aborted sneeze.
If you look at a bright light, it'll make you sneeze. The
Oh, okay.
sun is the one that always works.
Yeah. Something's pollinating. He told his supporters that his goal was to bring the American people together under an open administration, open to new ideas, open to men and women of both parties, open to the critics as well as those who support us. All right. Now there's a little bit more here. Anyways, I'm not going to give you all of the bio. There's so much of it, because there's so much to say about Nixon, but let's cut forward here. Nominated for a second term on 8/23/1972, Nixon won the election with 61% of the popular vote and 521 electoral votes against George S. McGovern. After the eruption of the Watergate scandal, he resigned his office on August 9, 1974. He is the author of 6 Crises, published in 1962. His downfall began with the break-in at the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate apartment complex on the night of June 17, 1972. On August 8, 1974, Nixon made a televised address announcing his intention to resign, saying he should have set a higher standard for the conduct of the people who participated in his campaigns and administration. On August 9, 1974, he left the White House. A month after his resignation, many were outraged when Nixon's successor, Gerald R. Ford, issued a pardon on September 18, 1974, for all crimes Nixon committed or may have committed or taken a part in during his presidency. That's carte blanche. After his resignation, he and Pat retreated to their beachfront home in San Clemente, California, where Nixon kept a low profile. He emerged 3 years later in 1977 for 5 televised conversations with interviewer David Frost. Nixon was pronounced dead at 9:08 p.m. on April 22, 1994, at New York Hospital, Cornell Medical Center, 10 months after losing his beloved Pat. His daughters, Tricia and Julie, were at his bedside. Well, I didn't know he was an actor.
That's what he
We
was.
thought Reagan set the standard for
Right.
presidential actors.
Yeah. But the sun in the Delphinus Decanate is in the 5th house, which has to do with entertainment, the arts, theater, creativity.
He loved to play the piano too, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think so.
I think he did, yeah.
So, there was this very creative side to this man, but whether it was personal ambition, which is not uncommon for Capricorn, or whether it was just being swept up, in the right place at the right time, it is hard to know what motivated this.
You think he thought it was a game?
Well,
That his political ambition, it was just a game that he played, and he wanted to be good at it, and
the sun in the 5th house likes to win. They do like to win. So this could be an expression of that. I mean, the martyrdom here also is, you've got to figure this man was sacrificed to some degree in the eyes of his children.
oh yeah.
Because it's a hard reputation to live down. The problem is when you leave office having done something so heinous, all of the good you may have done prior to that gets ignored, swept under the carpet somehow.
Isn't he the only president that resigned under duress?
Yes.
Well, that was the second time
It was
that
the
he was caught in some sort of underhanded political, financial, whatever. So, I mean, he didn't learn from his first mistake.
The checkered speech thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the chances are one would guess there were many other opportunities that just weren't caught.
Well, yeah, because his son is trying that ascendant. He thought he was invincible, probably. He probably got away with a lot of his...
Right, when you get away from things, you start to think that is the norm.
Right.
Christopher, I heard 2 days ago, Rachel Maddow read 2 of Nixon's letters to Pat, and they brought her to tears. They're the most beautiful romantic words I think I've ever heard from a living person.
And a Capricorn.
And Capricorn. Well, it isn't...
I mean, this is the love decanate of Capricorn.
And isn't that how he said he attracted the dolphins to save him through his song, right?
Yeah, through the poetry.
Yeah.
How lovely.
Yeah.
I never thought that he would be, I thought he would be a cold husband, but evidently not.
But again, with the sun in the 5th house, passions run deep and could have been quite the romantic.
It sounded.
And in that poetic decanate of the sign.
Maybe he was an intellectual romantic, though.
Now let's see. Mercury's in Capricorn. In
Moon's
a
in Aquarius.
conjunction with Mars and Jupiter. So, sort of a strategic mind.
How'd you get that out of it?
Being in Capricorn, and Mars is military strategy, conjuncting Mercury. Now, the first chart we looked at, Carey, Banks, Milhous, also had the Mars-Mercury conjunction. So there's, at least in this week's class, there's more than one parallel happening here.
You said that, since I don't know much about this yet, you said that the seat is the worst trait of Capricorns. And if you have the Mars influence there in the 4th house, could that also denote that the military strategy could be achieved through deceit? Like, you know, if he wanted Pat, he would do whatever it took to win her.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. The Capricorn, no surprise here, is the most powerful sign in the chart. Even though Mars is not in Capricorn, Mercury, Jupiter, and the Sun are. So Capricorn has 25% of his power. 1/4 of all the energy is tied up with this sign, which is both deceit and diplomacy. That's why he's the quintessential Capricorn, I think. What can we see here? Pluto in the house of reputation. We know Pluto is a drastic planet, and so wherever it falls, we can be transfigured in some ways or transformed in some ways suddenly. And this happened for him in the area of status and the career, where there was just a, very big change that took place. Pluto is also the lord of the underworld, and he was found out for these activities and events that were happening behind the scenes. Laura.
There's a different chart on my sheet of paper than up here on the wall.
Is there?
Yeah, Jupiter is the highest planet in the 9th house.
Let me look at the chart. I may not have.
And the moon is in
look at
the
that.
9th instead of.
Oh yeah, mine is too. Mine's different.
Huh.
I have the same machine as probably.
We probably all have the same printout.
Yeah.
Oh.
Want me to go double check the chart? Which chart is that?
That or I do that next week and we just
Okay.
move on to the next chart so
Good
that we
idea.
can bring the class to an end. Yeah, I will.
Yeah, actually, in the chart on the paper here, it's Saturn, Mars, Venus conjunct in the 4th house instead of Mars, Mercury, Jupiter. It's quite different. And the moon, instead of being in the 6th house along with Venus, there's an empty 6th house here, and the moon is up there in the 9th.
Well, it's a similar chart, but it's not the same one.
Yeah, and
It's pretty different, actually. Look at the placement of Uranus. It's the 5th house here.
I
on
would
the
say
wall.
it's the let's see, and for his generation, Neptune would have been in Cancer, right? Certainly not in Virgo, I don't think.
Neptune?
Well,
my apologies for that. The correct chart is on the board here.
right.
So
Okay. Okay.
And Uranus would-
in-
Well, people born in 1940 would have Uranus and Gemini, in the 40s, during the 40s and during the. I'm just trying to think the generational planets. They would all point to that chart being the right one.
this one on the board.
Yeah, the one on the board.
No, it is the correct one. Yes,
The
Barbara.
online people are saying they have the wrong one.
Yes.
Yeah, they do.
Those of you watching online, my apologies. I'll try and hopefully remember to print out the correct chart and get that to you.
Okay.
It's not hard for me to make errors these days, and they ended up in your handouts. So, all right, moving right along. Third decanate of Capricorn. Any planets from 20 to 29 degrees fall here. The solar dates are January 10th through 20th. The symbols are the Virgo decanate of Capricorn, which means Mercury is the ruler here. The constellation is the southern fish, Pisces australis, sometimes called Pisces austrinus. A fish drinking the water that flows from the urn of Aquarius. You can see the river Eridanus flows down to his mouth. Keyword for this one is idealism. And the spiritual text is, from the inner planes, it is possible for man to attract any information whatsoever he is capable of utilizing. Well, what sign are we talking about?
But any information could be negative information.
Absolutely.
Truly. You know, and there certainly are in movies and things these dark sorcerers that pull in their guidance. But what I think is so curious, looking at the text to all of these Capricorn decadents, it shows a whole other facet to this sign than what we're accustomed to if we just look on the surface.
But how does idealism, in this case the keyword, tie in with the deceptive side?
Well, let's go forward and maybe we'll find out. Okay. Pisces australis, or Pisces austrinus, is Latin for southern fish. Fomalhaut, Arabic for mouth of the fish, is the only bright star in the constellation. In classical mythology, this constellation is known as the Great Fish, and is portrayed as swallowing the water being poured out by the water bearer. So here he is, and that water comes down here. Cetus is at the edge. The twin fish of the constellation Pisces are said to be the offspring of the great fish. And in Egyptian mythology, this fish saved the life of the Egyptian goddess Isis. She rewarded the fish and its offspring by placing them in the heavens as constellations. Zane says, the southern fish, Pisces australis, is the constellation picturing the Mercury Decadent of Capricorn. It is shown as eagerly drinking the water that flows from the urn of Aquarius. This symbolizes the conception that through the cultivation of the higher emotions, it is possible to communicate volitionally with those who have passed to the spirit side of life. Also, that those on earth are, to an undreamed of extent, the recipients of love and wisdom poured down upon them by those who are of earth no more. People born under this decanate have natural ability to grasp the ideal and express it in concrete form. Their power of imagination is marked and is united to the faculty of intensive labor. They can follow clerical lines, but to develop their highest talents, they should be permitted to develop and execute plans of their own. They readily contact the interior planes and draw valuable information from that source, even when unconscious of the origin of their ideas. Those on the inner plane who have advanced in character and in wisdom band together in societies and groups, formulate better methods of living and higher standards of conduct. and make the endeavor to project these ideals to people yet on earth. The ideals of earth are thus received by those who are advanced enough here to receive them, and from minds on the inner planes. For this reason, and because those born from January 10th to January 20th, while the sun is in the third decanate of Capricorn, are particularly receptive to such exalted ideas. The key word of Pisces Australis section of the zodiac is idealism. While such ideals and valuable information may be broadcast from the inner planes to all the earth, for anyone who is receptive to pick them up, usually some one individual on the earth becomes the one through whom they are given to the world. This individual, through his basic character, vibrations, and intellectual interest, has an affinity for the ideals and knowledge given. His subsequent thinking about them and teaching them keep him in the stream of vibratory influence flowing from those on higher levels, much as the southern fish lives in and absorbs the stream from the Aquarian urn. Thus the text becomes, from the inner planes it is possible for man to attract any information whatsoever he is capable of utilizing. So, idealism. The cherishing or pursuit of high or noble principles, purposes, goals, etc. The practice of idealizing. Something idealized, an ideal representation. All right. Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr., a.k.a. Muhammad Ali. I liked his quote. I thought it adequately represented this concept. Not something you'd expect from a man that beats up on other grown men for a living. But listen, service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. Born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. in Louisville, Kentucky, January 17, 1942, Muhammad Ali is an African-American light heavyweight gold medalist, the only man to win the heavyweight championship of the world 3 times. Ali is the eldest of 2 sons born to Cassius Marcellus Clay Sr., a sign and mural painter, and Odessa Clay, a domestic. Ali struggled in his childhood as a slow reader, which may have led to his preoccupation with boxing. At age 12, Ali reported the theft of a bicycle. Investigating policeman Joe Martin invited the boy to train with Fred Stoner, who taught him to move with the speed and grace of a dancer. While still in high school, he won 100 out of 108 matches and earned 6 Kentucky and 2 National Golden Glove championships, as well as 2 Amateur Athletic Union championships. Ali was renowned for his skill at ring chatter, spouting off catchy phrases, geared to distract and frustrate his opponent, such as his famous chant, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." While at the 1960 Olympics in Rome at age 18, Ali won the boxing gold medal in the light heavyweight category. He returned to Louisville and signed a lucrative 50-50 split contract, turning him into a professional boxer. Ali began boxing professionally in 1960 and became the world champ in 1964 by knocking out Sonny Liston. Even with all his success, Ali lived in a racially divided America. Once he was refused service because he was black at a soda fountain. and in outrage, he threw his Olympic gold medal into a river. While in Miami, he met Malcolm X, who gave voice to Ali's disgust with racism. Joining the Nation of Islam, he was given the name Muhammad Ali by Elijah Muhammad, his new title meaning beloved of Allah. It was the beginning of his social and political activism. Ali was loathed by many Americans when it became known that he had converted to Islam. He was called everything from traitor to coward. When, as a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War, he refused to accept the draft. In May 1967, Ali was stripped of his title and boxing license by the World Boxing Association and charged for violating the Selective Service Act by the government. Even boxing fans and sport journalists joined the outcry, to which Ali commented, "I'm giving up my title, my wealth, maybe my future. Many great men have been tested for their religious beliefs. If I pass this test, I will come out stronger than ever." Sentenced to 5 years in prison and released on appeal, Ali's conviction was overturned 3 years later, and he returned to the ring. Ali has had 4 wives, 2 mistresses, and 9 children, 1 adopted. Kalaya, one of his daughters, has successfully built up her boxing career following in the footsteps of her father. In 1982, Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and commenced treatment. In August 1996, at the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Ali lit the Olympic torch, his arm shaking visibly as he raised it. Ali is one of the most popular and beloved figures of the sport world of the 20th century. His autobiography, Soul of a Butterfly, reflections on his life with a spiritual and philosophical perspective, was published in November 2004. All right. Sun in the 6th house. So the self-esteem here is tied up with his work, his service to others. And this is something that is not all that well known about him, but he founded a center in Louisville, Kentucky, which is the Muhammad Ali Center. So this is a place that offers programs to school children and art exhibits and other activities related to the African American community and to the larger community as well. So we can see service, as was described in his quote, is quite important to this man. His self-esteem or his identity is tied up with that. Both the moon and Mercury conjunct just 1 degree apart in the 6th house as well. Aquarius is one of the strongest signs in the chart. You can see the moon, Mercury, and Venus all fall in that sign. Venus is in the 7th house of marriage and partnership. I imagine when he loves deeply, but considering it's in direct opposition with his ascendant, that might explain the 4 wives. You know, that's a can't live with them and can't live without them aspect.
Especially with his Leo ascendant.
Yes.
Well, on all his puffed up statements, that he was so famous for so long.
Which usually had to do with his being the best.
Right.
Well, he was.
And he mouthed about it.
Yeah. And we can see Mercury also is in opposition to the ascendant. The moon is in opposition to the ascendant. So that is certainly a braggadocio, that type of aspects to a Leo rising. You may feel you're good, and you may feel you're important, and you may feel it's your responsibility to inform the world of that. And we have here, from the second house of money and finance, we can see that Neptune forms a trine to the Sun and
Grand trine.
a trine to Saturn, a trine to Uranus. So there is a grand trine in Earth in this chart, involving the house of wealth, the house of service or work, and the house of career, honor, reputation.
Does he have accumulated wealth, or do you know? He does.
The second
Yeah.
house is
Even though it was taken away from
Yes.
him?
Yep. 10th house is 28.8% of the power of the chart. Do all of you recognize this name?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What is
How about Carrie Banks Mullis?
No.
Okay.
What is the 10th house?
That was the
Business
10th house
honor,
is reputation,
Oh, reputation.
your career, your honor, your public visibility. So, it's clear that this is a publicly visible man. We all know his name.
What was that household word aspect? That was a moon thing, right?
I thought it was a moon.
Usually dominant moon.
Dominant moon.
His moon trines Jupiter in the 10th house, too. Moon and Mercury trine Jupiter.
That certainly is nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, Moon trine Jupiter, Mercury trine Jupiter. Jupiter is trined by Moon, Mercury, and by Venus. It's wide, the trine to Venus, very wide, but nevertheless it is in orb here.
And it's interesting that Venus is in a T-square to Saturn, and isn't it? Did I look at that
21,
right?
20 to 21, yeah, that's a
So
square.
that's,
Yeah,
he's
T-square,
got all this
the
great
ascendant,
harmony, but he's also
Venus, Saturn. But that is the type of aspect that could certainly make one reviled. This is someone who can be both loved, you've got the grand trines, and you've got the T-square, reviled. Mars is in the 9th house, so this is somebody who could not be quiet about his opinions, beliefs, or objections of any kind. And it's also someone whose conversion process would become visible.
Well, look at that, it's square to Pluto.
Well, yeah,
And his religious beliefs caused imprisonment.
And what is it we call draft resistant? Not passive. The Venus in the 7th house. The house in the house of war.
Subjective.
Conscious objective, or but being, taking the line of
Yeah, the Pacific planet in
he's not into war,
the House of War, right?
but it's in that T square, so it didn't do his reputation any good.
Nobody bought
Well, he was known more as a fighter than a lover.
Exactly. People didn't buy it. Here's this man that beats up on other men, and as opposed to war. So there was, there was something incongruous in that for many.
So, if we looked at it by today's standards, the National Boxing Association or whatever it was that took away his title did something wrong, correct? by taking away his title because he was a conscientious objector? I mean, what does that have to do with the price of tea and china? You know?
Yeah, I don't know enough about those types of organizations or the sporting world or how they work. It's really out of my...
Well, they have rules.
But I do know they have rules and things
about
such
how you
as
have to be in good
felons
standing.
can't, win things. I was watching last night American Idols,
Oh, yeah.
and there was a young man on that show. They have standards if you're in this competition, much like a sporting competition. They have standards that you can't have outstanding warrants or have a felon attached to your name, sort of things like that. And so this brilliant singer was taken off the show because he did not disclose to them when he came aboard the fact that he had 4 outstanding warrants.
Under several names.
Well,
Yeah,
I didn't think
and
you'd
one
want
was
me if you
drug
knew this.
related. Yeah, that was hard though. What public revilement, I mean, that
Well,
was
but
a
I'll bet-
difficult thing.
Except for the way they ended that, which was they actually ended it not with him just getting into a taxi and driving off. They actually showed him singing in one of his finest moments, which I thought was really honorable to say that,
Yeah.
the thing is, this person,
Yeah.
he may have 4 warrants and uses a variety of
And they
aliases,
acknowledge
but
that a
this,
lot
look at
of
he
young-
has this talent.
And they acknowledge that a lot of young people in this world these days go through similar things that
Mhm.
he's been through. So they didn't single him out as a pariah.
No, other than the fact that it was not disclosed, and
Right.
this is their rules. So I would imagine that at that time, the National Boxing Association probably had rules about not being able to be in prison, and that you had to be able to be a representative of the organization, a proper representative.
What was it he was in prison for, Christopher?
Draft resistance.
Oh. And then stripped of his title.
Mm-hmm.
Which was imprisonable. That's why people went to Canada.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So they couldn't go to prison.
But
Now,
that
the fact
title-
was it was returned to him, well, Jupiter, you've got the Saturn-Uranus conjunction here, which is the sudden demotion or sudden loss of one's title or reputation. And then you have restoration, Jupiter in the 10th house. So you can see how the stories unfold in these charts. It's all, our spiritual DNA is sort of encoded in here. And we just have to know enough to be able to read it. Therein lies our challenge, and that's why we study this. Because I can't only paraphrase what Carrie Banks Mullis said about, and forgive me if there's any psychiatrists out there listening to this, but the thought that astrology has done more for people than psychiatry in terms of providing them with insights.
Right. Well, it can also give you a path forward,
Mm-hmm.
if you can apply.
So, we have only 2 classes left, March 22nd and March 29th, which will be the Decadence of Aquarius and Pisces.
Wonderful, Christopher.
Thank you. Thank you. Any comments, questions, additions? Sorry about getting you the wrong chart, but
Are there any questions over here?
I am trying to do a lot these days. No? Then we'll call it quits for the evening. Some of you have to get to the airport, and others have a warm bed to return to.
A warm bed.
Yes, Barbara?
your listening audience has had quite a time. They would go black and go silent, and then it would come back, and Alice Marie said it just came back on. Maybe it's sunspots.
Yeah, there is another download.
Solar flare.
That or
Today.
Mercury being his trickster zone.
I'm sorry it went down. Fortunately, those of you who are watching online, we only have a minor semblance of control over what happens on this end and what happens when it goes through the internet is certainly out of our control. But we will have a fully recorded video that in a week should be up on the internet if you want to catch up with anything you may have missed tonight. And for the same of you in the class.
Of this
If you missed something?
Of this very real-time
Yes.
presentation. So the video here is intact, it's just what goes out that can get
Right.
corrupted.
If their local internet service provider goes down, they
Right.
can't see it. And
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
great.
locally I was having trouble with my Quest service this morning. So it's happening in
Right.
more than one place.
But that's great that the one that gets archived, we always have a in-house
In-house
perfect
full, well, perfect's a very strong word to use.
They're such good classes.
Thank you.